So today is April 10th, 2023. It's about 3:30 Dallas time, and I'm Anna Siegel speaking with Jerry Zeffren. So Jerry, do you want to start off by telling us where you grew up?
Okay. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, actually a suburb called University City, Missouri. Spent all my childhood and into my young adulthood in University City until we moved. First move we made was to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, after I got married and already had a kid. But University City was my home all the way through college.
Okay. And had your family lived in that city for a long time?
My parents had lived in St. Louis, the St. Louis area, for a long time. University City we moved to just a little bit before my twin brother and I were born.
So how many generations of your family lived in the United States?
My grandfather on my father's side and my grandmother and grandfather on, well, let's put it this way. My maternal grandparents and my paternal grandparents lived in the United States. They came from the Pale of Russia around 1900, between 1900 and 1904 is when they all came. They moved, my mom's folks moved to St. Louis right away because they had relatives there who were sponsoring them. My dad's family actually moved to Rock Island, Illinois, where their family had come before my grandfather came. So my mother and father were first generation Americans, and my brothers and I were second generation already.
Okay. So you had a twin brother?
Yes, twin brother and an older brother.
Okay, 3 boys.
Yes.
Okay.
Not so great for my mom, but...
What did they say, my 3 sons? Right. So tell me a little bit about your Jewish education.
Okay. I grew up in a conservative Jewish home. We kept kosher at home. Separate dishes, separate Passover dishes as well. And I went to Sunday school from the time I was in kindergarten and Hebrew school from the time I was in 2nd grade. In those days, Hebrew school was 4 days a week after school, and I went to a synagogue called B'nai Emunah, which is a big conservative synagogue in St. Louis. It's still going, dated back to the 1800s. We had an hour and a half of Hebrew and Judaica study 4 days a week after school. And fortunately our school, our public school, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure, our public school was just a short walk from the synagogue. But then we also went to Saturday morning services, junior congregation, and we had 2.5 hours on Sunday also. So, except for Friday night, which we had Shabbos at home, I was pretty much in the shul every day for, well, till after my bar mitzvah. And then I did keep studying through the 10th grade, Sunday school, and I was taking an advanced Hebrew education course also through the synagogue up until about the 10th grade.
So was that pretty typical for young Jewish teenagers?
People, for members of B'nai Emunah and other conservative congregations in St. Louis, yes. The Reform congregations, they had a different schedule back then. I couldn't tell you exactly how many days and how many hours they attended, but it's not as few as there is today. That's for sure.
So were you involved in reading Torah and leading services at that time?
No. I was involved in the choir, the High Holiday Choir. Both my twin brother and I sang. And from the time we were 8 years old, we were in the boys and men's choir. And then as we got older, I graduated to being in the men's part of the choir, and my twin brother kind of dropped out. And I just kept singing.
Okay, so were you only singing in the synagogue, or did you sing in other venues?
I sang all over the place. singing and acting became an interest of mine. So I was involved in a lot of shows at school and other acting theater organizations outside of school. And then I kept singing in the synagogue for the high holidays every year that I could. And subsequently became a soloist at the Reform congregation when I was in my 20s. And also sang at the Episcopal Church and the Presbyterian Church.
You shared your voice.
I was an ecumenical singer, yes.
Did you do any singing in the secular world?
Yes, yeah. I did quite a bit of singing. Musical comedy, I was involved in musical comedy a lot. I did a little opera along the way and sang at a lot of weddings. And it was a significant part of my life and a very interesting part of my life.
Well, we know you're still doing some singing in the synagogue here.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell us how you got involved in that?
Well, it started when I was 8 years old, actually. Started in the choir. What I'm doing now, primarily, though, is I daven haftorahs and read from the Torah and lead services at our synagogue, which is Beth Torah out in Richardson. And I guess you could say I came back to that. I had not read Torah much in my earlier days. I did a haftorah every now and then, but we had a rabbi early on in the early years at Beth Torah. Didn't stay very long. His name was Michael Goldberg, and he was instrumental in getting congregants involved in the services. That was kind of a minhag of our congregation. It started, when the congregation started in 1974, the people who founded it, there were 6 families who founded it, they somehow got in touch with Ron Gruen, who became like a mentor for the congregation and its congregational direction and learning. And Ron was a big believer in participation, in congregant participation. So he also taught a lot of people how to lead the services. But Michael Goldberg actually taught us all Torah trope. Those of us who wanted to learn how to read Torah, he had a class in Torah trope. And he was only there about 6 months. But in that 6 months, there were about 5 or 6 of us who became regular Torah readers. So that's what started me doing that. And now I do it quite regularly.
So you said you grew up in St. Louis, and you mentioned that you lived in, did you say Rapid City?
University City.
University City, and then you moved from there.
When after we got married and I was in the work world, I took an assignment for the company I was working for in St. Louis to go into at Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and become their representative for the eastern half of Iowa. We did that for about 20 months, and then they brought me back to St. Louis and put me in another position. And then I stayed with that company another 3 or 4 years, and then I got into what really became my career. I got involved in the recycling industry. And so 20 months in Cedar Rapids, and then back to St. Louis, and then St. Louis from 69 to 76 when I moved to Dallas. The family moved to Dallas.
Okay, so I've heard about the recycling industry. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, my involvement in it was in the metal end of it, scrap metal recycling. The first job I had in that industry was in 1969, and I went to work for a copper refinery in St. Louis. That's an interesting story. I was working for this company, Metal Goods, for which I had gone to Cedar Rapids and then come back and work for a few more years with them after I came back to St. Louis. And I had gotten to the point where I felt I really wasn't challenged enough. So I started looking around for kind of a more complex involvement and the metal industry was fine. I was selling new product for Metal Goods. I was not involved in scrap at that time. And I went to a employment agency that specialized in sales jobs, And I was trying to find something that was more like an industrial sales. And this agent said to me, he says, you know, I know of a job that might be good for you. We don't have a listing on it, but they want somebody who's Jewish. And I had just come from an interview, and I told this fellow about it. I'd just come from an interview where being Jewish was a negative. The fellow who was interviewing me said, and I never hid the fact that I was Jewish. I always put down as references whoever was my rabbi at that time. So the people I was talking to would know that they were talking to somebody who was Jewish. And this fellow who was interviewing me for, can I name the company? The company was Pitney Bowes. They make postage machines. At least that was their main product back then. And he made some kind of comment about, it's been his experience that people who are Jewish often always want to go out and start their own businesses after working for a little while. And so he asked me how I felt about that. Well, I felt that the question was totally out of place in the first place, and I told him so, and I said, so frankly, I'm really not all that interested in continuing the interview. So when I went back to the Salesforce agency and heard that they had a job that they wanted somebody who was Jewish, I said, I better go talk to these people. Well, what it was a company called Cerro Copper, and they were a tube manufacturing company, copper tube. And they made the copper tube out of scrap, and scrap copper. So the job they had open was somebody who would be talking to people in the recycling and scrap business, buying their copper scrap for the refinery. And it has happened because of the way things grew up when the immigrants started to come to America. The scrap business was heavily populated by Jewish men and families, Jewish families. So that was why they wanted somebody who was Jewish, felt like that would be an end point, wouldn't have to get over any humps from in that regard. So I looked at the job, and I looked at the people, and I said, well, let's give it a try. And I stayed with that company for 7 years. And then they started to bring in some family members that were being put over me, and so I realized my chance for advancement wasn't all that great going forward. So I started looking around again, and around that time, Commercial Metals here in Dallas was my largest supplier of copper scrap. And Bert Romberg was the vice president of the division that was selling the scrap. And so I knew Bert, and he asked me if I was interested in coming to interview for a job there. They had just had an opening in there for a copper trader. And I said, sure. And it worked out beautifully. I came down for the interview on January 31st, and I had left St. Louis. It was 16 degrees and bone-chilling cold. And here I got off the plane. It was 71 degrees, and the sun was shining. January 31st. And I called Jo, my wife, and I said, I don't care what they offer, I'm coming down. I never told Bert that.
That's a good story. So that's interesting about what you said, that you felt uncomfortable, you know, when that first interview. So it just made me wonder, did you experience any anti-Semitism in your working career or in your life?
No, not really, except for that one instance. The people I was working for at Metal Goods Corporation, the one that I had gone to work for in the mid-60s, they were all good people, and nobody else was Jewish but me, at least in our division, and I didn't know other people. They had outlets in New Jersey, and I have a feeling that some of the people who might be working for them in New Jersey were Jewish, but in the St. Louis office, no, there wasn't anybody else. And then when I went to work for Cerro Copper, my boss was Jewish, the head of the plant was Jewish, the head engineer was Jewish. There were a lot of people who were Jewish at that company. And in Commercial Metals, same situation. At the time, Jake Feldman was the chairman, and I mean, he's well known in this community for sure. And Bert was my immediate boss, and there were other employees all throughout the system. Mm. So that was a very comfortable situation. And of course, the people I was dealing with in the scrap metal industry were still largely Jewish.
Interesting. So you mentioned Joe.
Yes.
How did you two meet?
We met in high school. We both were at University City High School. She was a year behind me, and we met in choir, chorus class. And it was her first or second day, actually, as a sophomore at the school. It was a 3-year high school, and I was a year ahead of her. And I don't know, I just knew right then it was this was going to be interesting, and I was going to try to make it interesting. She didn't have the same thoughts and feelings as I did to begin with, but ultimately over time we got together.
It took.
Yeah.
How many years are you married?
We're going to be 60 in September.
Mazel tov. Great. Great. So tell me about the move to Dallas and what the city was like when you moved here.
Oh, wow. You know, it's interesting. I don't have a lot of distinct memories about how the city was at the time. I do know, I can remember that we weren't happy with the Italian food situation that was here. Because coming from St. Louis, a very, very rich Italian community, long-term Italian community, and the Italian food there was just impossible to beat. And we didn't find a satisfactory Italian restaurant at that time. That's changed. It's changed greatly. But we found Tex-Mex, and that became our go-to going out dinner, and the kids liked it too. The weather obviously was superior, even in the summertime. It was easier to take summers here than winters there. The city actually grew up around us. I mean, when we moved here at the corner of Preston and Beltline, it was I call it a horse farm. There was a corral there and riding stables and just big open fields, and that was in 1976. We moved here in '76, and I mean there were Hillcrest was a one-lane road past Beltline, and it was not nearly as sophisticated. The cultural outlets, they were there. I mean, there was a symphony here at the time, and there was an art museum, but not to the extent that they have grown and flourished. I mean, the Nasher was not even in Mr. Nasher's dream at that time. And the Symphony Hall, the Meyerson, I think, was sometime in the early 80s. They started working on that, and of course what's going on down there in the Arts District now is just sensational. It's very, very advanced culturally. But it wasn't like that in 1976. And I sensed a difference in the Jewish community. And since this is a Jewish Historical Society interview, it's worth talking about. When we moved here, it was as if the people who were Jewish had this sense about them that they just didn't want to draw too much attention to themselves. They were not, you know, they weren't cowering or hiding or anything, but it wasn't, you just didn't have the entrance into the general community that you see of the Jewish community now. It was like, let's keep everything kind of to ourselves and keep our profile low, and everybody will be happy. And I guess it was, you know, it was an outcropping of the way things developed in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, where it was a little bit more difficult all over for Jews in the United States, just from a discomfort. It wasn't like it was all that dangerous. Certainly not like it was in Europe and Russia at the time, but people just didn't want to call too much attention to themselves. And now there's a much more bold presence of the Jewish community, which I think is terrific. But St. Louis had a large Jewish community at the time. When we left, there was about 80,000 in the Jewish community in St. Louis, which was pretty significant for the 50s and 60s. And they were very present in the community. And so that was a difference that I found here from that. But in terms of the city itself, I didn't notice things that were specifically so different back then. But things kind of evolved, you know, things that were here evolved into the type of things they are now. They weren't not here, they just were a little bit less dramatic and less visible.
Yeah, there's been a lot of changes since 1976.
Yeah.
So, tell me, you're married almost 60 years, and this record will be available for people to see. Is there something that you would like to be remembered for, if you could choose, or some advice you would give to younger people?
To be remembered for, just to be somebody who got along with everybody, tried my best not to get in trouble, and I think just being a concerned and involved person. Like to be remembered as somebody who participated in the Jewish community in an active way, was very active in my synagogue all the way through my life. So I think that's something that I definitely would like on my record. Okay. As far as advice, I would just say something very generic to young people, is never turn down an opportunity that you think might give you a better life. I learned from that opportunity experience, and it served me in good stead. The job changes that I made, every one of them was an improvement over the last one, and it just worked out very well for both Joe and me and our family. So follow your dreams, and if you see the right opportunity, take it.
Very good advice. And just one other, you've recently made a change in that you and Joe moved to Legacy Mid-Park.
Yes.
You want to just tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's been terrific. We love it here. We're involved in a lot of activities that go on here. They have something all day long. If you can get involved in things that, that you can stay busy and involved and learning. You can be educated in so many different ways from the programs they have here. And it's been a delight, it really has. And I must say that the physical exercise opportunities and the physical fitness opportunities that are here have been terrific for both of us. We're taking advantage of it. And probably both of us are in better shape for our age than we have been at any time. We've got other issues that came along with aging, but for the shape we're in as good a shape as we can be. And that's been a definite plus. And the fact that they have a meal program here is very good. Joe doesn't have to spend time in the kitchen, which is really one of the reasons we came here. I don't know if she mentioned this in her interview, but one of the reasons we decided to move here was lasagna. She makes the greatest veggie lasagna that you could want. But it's a big deal. She makes a lot of it, and then we cut it up and freeze it because there was just the two of us at home for the last several years. And she was making this lasagna, and she realized she couldn't walk around the kitchen and do all the things she had to do over the length of time that it took to make this lasagna. And she said, okay, it's time. And we had been looking at this facility since even before they started building it. So we knew that when it was time for us to make a move like this, we were going to come here. And the timing couldn't have been better for us. We moved here in the end of July. At the end of July of 2021, they just opened the building in February of that year. So it was just right. We didn't have to wait once we made the decision to do it. So it was good.
So you seized the opportunity. You took your advice.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. I don't have anything else to ask you. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish?
Not really. I think we covered most of the things that I wanted to say to you.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to turn this off now.
Thank you.